and great is his faithfulness. Go ahead and have a seat. Oh, forgot my Bible. Well, turn to Matthew chapter 14, where we'll be this morning. While you're turning there, just a kind of little update here. If you kind of like look around the campus, you'll see some things that are kind of in transition. So like right outside, we got some planters and stuff that are all dirt. And they're not going to remain all dirt, but we are going to plant some stuff there. But we removed what was in there before so that we can re-landscape the front here. And so working on that, but probably not till planting time for the plants we're going to be doing is November. But we'll have a nice big planting party that you're all going to be invited to come November. So don't worry about that. But also you might see, if you travel down on the south side, you'll see that there's been some windows put in the Fellowship Hall building and look beautiful. That's part, and then you'll see some other fascia boards that have turned from red raisin to light gray, and that's just the light gray is primer. But we're redoing a lot of the fascia boards, and then we're going to be repairing a lot of the stucco, and then repainting the whole place. We're also going to be working on this year the old rugged cross is a little too old and rugged, and so we got shingles falling off and things. So we're actually working on plans to refurbish that whole cross. It's going to be something completely different, and the marquees out front, as well as we got a cell tower coming in. It's going through plan check right now, so down there by Fellowship Hall, there will be a cell tower coming in, and so I mean we got a lot of things happening right now that it's just all these balls in the air that we're juggling right now. But a lot of fun stuff, cool stuff. In like 6 months, this whole place is going to be looking tip-top shape. So Matthew chapter 14, 22 through 36. Let's go ahead and read this biblical narrative here, one of the great stories in the Bible here. So what had just happened, again, last week, if you missed last week, hopefully you went back online and looked at that, but last week he fed the 5,000. So Jesus fed 5,000, took a little boy's sack lunch, and turned it into food for closer to 15,000, 20,000 people. And so wonderful, wonderful account. Go back and listen to the sermon online if you missed that. But that just happened. And so then we see in the Gospel of John that at the end of this, John says that the people looked and said, whoa, this is the prophet of God, the prophet who's been told about. Which talking about Moses there, like when Moses, back in Deuteronomy, God says to Moses, hey, I'm going to raise up a prophet like you. And so here Jesus does this miracle of feeding the 5,000. They're demonstrating that he is that prophet like Moses who called upon God, and God brought manna from heaven, bread from heaven. Jesus in John 6 draws this direct parallel to the food he gave and the manna from heaven, but then said, I am the bread of life. And so there's all this messianic stuff about Jesus being the prophet, the king, the high priest that is prophesied to come in the future. And so that's what happened there with the multitude. So in John, then, the people see this. They see what Jesus has done. They want to make him king. They're like, hey, let's come and we are going to take him by force, make him be our king. And so they're seeing the messianic aspect of who Jesus is, the coming Messiah. And so it's time, let's make him king, and he'll provide food for us forever. And so Jesus, seeing that, he sends the crowds away. Or he sends the crowds away, but he sends his disciples away too. And so in Matthew chapter 14, we don't get that little piece of knowledge there, but that is what leads into Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. It says, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, while he sent the crowds away. After he had sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when it was evening, he was there alone. So the disciples get in the boat, the 12, they get into a little fishing boat, and they go across the Sea of Galilee, he said, to the other side. they wouldn't travel necessarily across the middle of the lake in those boats, but they would go to the other side. They travel along the coastline. And scholars don't know, they're torn where exactly the feeding of the 5,000 happened and where the disciples were going to, because the different gospel accounts apparently seem to contradict one another, but they don't really, but it is still hard to pinpoint because some of each gospel writer is giving a different emphasis and emphasizing different things, and so some details they might leave out, which makes it look like they might contradict, but knowing that they're not necessarily giving you all the details, you can see a way that they all connect as far as the locations go, but it's still hard to determine for sure. Some people think it happened on the east side of the Sea of Galilee, and some people think it happened on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. Like the scholars can't be aren't in total agreement on that. But it really doesn't matter to the story. But Jesus sends them away. It's about evening time. He goes up onto the mountain to pray. And in all of the Sea of Galilee is actually low. It's below sea level, about 600 feet below sea level. And so it's surrounded actually by mountains. But I think that, when he says the mountain would refer to Mount Arbel, which I'll show a picture of that in a second. But he goes up on a mountain to pray by himself, and when it was evening, he was there alone. So they go out on the sea evening time, right? Verse 24, but the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. The winds were picking up, and they were against them, and so they're having a hard time rowing across the lake. John says they went about 3 to 4 miles, and that was totally doable. They're going across the lake, and they're stuck out in the middle. Like they're not not in the middle necessarily of the lake, but they're not close to shore. If they're going across to where likely they were going, they would be far enough away from shore that if the winds were contrary against them, they couldn't even get back to shore. And they're just struggling, and these are fishermen, so they're struggling at the oars. It says in Mark that they're struggling at the oars. Jesus sees them struggling at the oars. The wind is contrary. Verse 25, and in the fourth watch of the night, which is between 3 and 6 a.m. Okay, so they left before evening. Now it's 3 to 6 in the morning. Okay, and they're still struggling. In the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, and they said, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter said to him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But seeing the wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind stopped. And those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "You are certainly God's Son." When I was growing up here in at Bethany, in children's church, Lillian Kearns, she was the children's church leader, and she had a big old flip chart of songs. And the favorite song that I had, and my brother and I and Paul Grissa would always request, was this song about Peter. I can't remember what the title was, but I do remember the song. So here you go. All right. So it goes like, and it tells the story really well. It says, "As long as Peter kept his eyes on Jesus, he walked the waves of Galilee. But when he saw the waves and not the Savior, he sank down into the sea. Oh, Peter, Peter, Jesus' disciple, I've learned a lesson from you. When the waves of trouble do roll, and the storm beats high on my soul, I will trust the master of the sea, and not myself, O Lord, forbid. For when I keep my eyes on Jesus, I'll walk the waves as Peter did." There you go. There you go. All right. So I remember that from childhood, from being a little kid. I remember that song, and I looked it up online. I can't even find it online. So that was all from memory, just from when I was a kid. Yeah, I'm not old enough yet to remember. I forget a lot of things, but I haven't forgotten that one. So great song, but it's a great song, and it actually has the truth. I mean, the lesson of this whole thing is in that song, keeping our eyes on Jesus, and that's what we really want to do, because when we keep our eyes on Jesus, we can walk the waves like Peter did. You can walk on water too like Peter did. So let's go into the story, let's unpack it, let's kind of see some of these things. It's a story that I know is familiar to most of us, but look at it with a fresh lens, like I said, like last week. Look at this with a fresh lens. Think about what really happened that night, this incredible thing. So, Jesus makes them go across the sea. Maybe he doesn't want them to get wrapped up in the crowds wanting to make him by force king. They don't want, because he knows the disciples, his disciples, they're thinking the similar things like maybe this is the Messiah. And maybe when he becomes king, we will be able to rule at his side. That's what they're thinking. We see that all through the Gospels. So if the crowds are pressing in on Jesus to make him their messianic king, maybe Jesus is saying, hey, disciples, you guys take off. I want you guys to go away. I don't want you guys to get wrapped up in this because it's not my time. It's not time yet. So he sends them away. Then he sends the crowds away. Then it says he goes up on the mountain to pray, which is what he meant to do in the first place. They were going to come out here to rest and pray and rejuvenate themselves. And so finally, he's getting the rest. The disciples, though, are not getting their rest. They're straining at the oars. They are struggling against the wind here. But Jesus up on this mountain to pray. And sometimes, when we are going through difficult things in our lives, the storms, the trials, the tribulations in our lives, it can feel like God's not there. Where are you, Lord? Where are you at? And I'm sure the disciples, they're probably been straining here for hours. They're tired, they're exhausted, and they're probably thinking, where is our rabbi? If he were here, maybe he would do something about this, like he did before. In Mark, we see before this happened, Jesus had calmed the storms. They'd gone across to the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, and while they were there, they got in a boat, and there was a huge storm, so much that these fishermen were scared for their lives. These guys who had been on the sea all their lives, they were frightened. But Jesus says, hush, be still, and calms the storm. So they had seen that. They had seen Jesus calm a storm. So here they are struggling. They're like, where are you now, Jesus? Why aren't you here? Why would you send us away and do this? And you're not here. You could deal with this. You could take care of this problem. He's not there. But where is he? And this is the first point I want to make is Jesus sees you in the storm. He saw them, and he's up on the mountain. And it says in Mark, he saw them straining at the oars. I got a picture of a cute little couple up on top of Mount Arbel, and Mount Arbel here. If you look around, you see there's hillsides, mountainsides, kind of all around. But this is the high point here on Mount Arbel at the Sea of Galilee, and you can even see there to Christy's right, there are some boats out there in the water. Those would be some small boats, just like what they might have been as fishermen. And so from this vantage point, if it was this vantage point or if it was some other mountainside around, Jesus could easily see the disciples straining at the oars. And they would go, so if they left from this land going across, they weren't going across to the eastern side over there. They were going across probably up towards Capernaum over there, which is about 7 miles over there. So they're crossing there. So Jesus sees them straining, not making any headway on their distance, on their travel. Like going, oh man, they're not getting anywhere. Jesus sees them. That's the thing. He sees them. He sees us in the struggles, in the storms of our life. He's watching. He sees. They may have been afraid. You might be afraid. You might be somewhere right now, and you're afraid right now. There's fear, there's anxiety, there's frustration, and you're going, do you see me, Jesus? One of the great passages in the Bible in Matthew we looked at a while ago, Matthew 10, 29 through 31, Jesus said, "Are not two sparrows sold for a penny, a cent? And yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered, so do not fear. You are more valuable than many sparrows." Like you are valuable to God. He sees you in the storms. But here's the thing. Jesus could have, as he sees them struggling from that mountaintop, he could have spoken and said, "Be still. Stop. Storm, go away. Let my disciples cross." He could have spoken and stopped it right there, but he didn't. He didn't. See, peace, second point, peace is not found in the absence of the storm, but in the presence of Jesus. This is one of the most important things of this passage here. That we're not going to find our security simply from the absence of storms and struggles in life. We're going to find security. We're going to find peace. We're going to find rest. We're going to find joy in the presence of Jesus. And that's it. And that's what he wants to teach them right now in this storm. Jesus allowed the storm to happen. He is going to meet them in the midst of the storm. His goal isn't to remove the storm so they can get to their side. His goal is to teach them a lesson in the middle of the storm. And Jesus allows the troubles and the trials of this life. Jesus even said in John chapter 10, he said, 10:33, he said, "Look, in this world, you will have struggles. You'll have trials. You'll have tribulations. You will. It will happen. There will be many." He says, "But take courage, for I have overcome the world." The goal isn't to remove those things, but to find Jesus and keep our eyes on him in the midst of it. So Jesus comes to them walking on the water in the middle of this storm. So you got these waves going. They're probably not as big of waves as happened in the last one, but they're wind and waves enough to cause them to not be able to row. And so it's not, Jesus isn't just walking on some calm lake. He's walking on these choppy waters. So I want you to have that mental picture here of these choppy waters, wind blowing here, and Jesus is walking on the storm. He's walking on that. And he comes out to them, and they see him walking, and it says in Mark that he was about to pass by, which I don't know if Jesus just meant that as a joke, oh, hey, I didn't see you guys here, and he's going to pass right by him or not, but he was passing them by. Like he's walking on water faster than these 12 guys can row this boat. Okay, that's what's happening here. So Jesus is walking on the water, about to pass them by. And they look and they go, "Oh, it's a ghost." Now, why would they think it's a ghost? Because, how many times have you seen someone walk on water? Not many times, probably, right? So it would be, logical to think maybe there's some kind of ghost, some kind of apparition. But also, the sea, when you look in the Bible, the sea is symbolic of evil and chaos. It is also called the abyss. And so it's a place of like evil spirits and the dead. And so naturally, maybe they're in the middle of the night here and there is some image walking across thinking it's something evil that is there, this evil presence. Some ghost. But Jesus says, because they cry out in fear, he says, take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid. And there's more in that saying, right? What Jesus said there, we're going to get to that in a second. But he says that, and then Peter goes, if it's you, Lord, then command me to come to you. Now that seems like a ridiculous thing. Who would ever say that, right? Like, command me to walk on the water. I mean, that seems ridiculous. But it's not as far-fetched as it might appear on the surface, because Jesus had told them already and given them authority. In Matthew chapter 10:1, he had said, I'm sending you guys out, you 12 out, I'm sending you out into the world, and I've given you all authority over evil spirits, unclean spirits, and to heal all sorts of diseases. So he had given them his power. And as their rabbi, Jesus was showing them how they ought to follow him. They're disciples following the rabbi. And so they're wanting to imitate everything he does. And so Jesus had already given them power to do a lot of things he did. So here Jesus is walking on the water. And so he would say, Rabbi, like, let me do the same thing. I want to follow you. And that should be our heart as disciples. Say, let me follow Jesus. I want to follow in his footsteps. If he's walking on the water, then I want to walk on the water too. And so it's not crazy, but it is crazy, because that seems like that would require a lot of faith and boldness to sit there and say, I think I could do this too. So I'm going to get out of the boat. Jesus, get out of the boat. So he gets out of the boat and he starts walking on the water. He's doing the impossible here. Why? Because he's so brave? Because he's so courageous? Because he chose to get out of the boat? No, because he has eyes fixed on Jesus. Because his eyes were so fixed on Jesus that the waves, the issue at hand, was diminished, was actually not an issue anymore. And that's what happens when we're on the storms of life. We need to keep our eyes so fixed on Jesus that the storms seem small. The waves seem like nothing, because we've got Jesus. And so the issue now we see with Peter is not the waves. It's the issue is, can I keep my gaze fixed on Jesus? And when he took his gaze off of Jesus and he looked at the waves, got scared, that's when he sank. But if he kept his eyes fixed on Jesus, he walked towards him on the water. He did the impossible. Jesus calls us to keep our eyes fixed on him in this life. And when we go through struggles, oftentimes our eyes just go away from him. We stop coming to church. We stop praying. We stop doing the things that really we need to be doing. Instead of gazing at Jesus, we focus so much and get worried about the waves in this life. But when we keep our eyes on Jesus, we too can do the impossible. We too can do things that the world will go, how were you able to do that? How were you able to survive in the midst of all that is going on in your life? How are you able to have such poise and such resilience in this life? When you're going through this hardship, you're going through cancer, you're going through this financial crisis, you're going through this relational struggle, whatever it is, and we go through that with our eyes fixed on Jesus, and the world should take notice and go, how did you do that? It's impossible that you were able to make it through this. And we say, yes, because my eyes were fixed on Jesus. I did the impossible. And then, though, sometimes we fall. And when we fall, we need to ask ourselves why. So here, Jesus is I'm sure, just like, come on, buddy. Keep walking. He's happy for Peter. And then Peter takes his eyes off, looks at the waves, and he sinks. He becomes afraid, and he sinks. But Jesus is right there, right? He's right there to grab his hand and lift him up. It says immediately when he sank, grabs his hand and he brings him up. And when he's got him there now secure in his hand, when Jesus looks at Peter and knows, okay, Peter, feel safe now, he says, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt? It's a great question to ask. And I think a lot of times we look at this and we go, man, he got it. Like he got rebuked. I don't read this as some harsh rebuke by Jesus, but more of a tender rebuke. As one like going, you were doing so good. Why did you doubt? You of little faith. That word, you of little faith, that's a phrase in English, you of little faith, right? But in the Greek, it's one word, and it's the only place they've ever been able to find this word is here that Jesus uses this in a few places in the Gospels. It's like a word that Jesus coined himself, made up of two words, little and faith. Like, you of little faith. And it was, I don't want to say it's like a term of endearment, but I think he's using it as an encouragement to them. Hey, you have little faith. But what did Jesus say that you could do with little faith? If you have a little faith, even the size of a mustard seed, he says you can move mountains. Peter, with his little faith, was able to walk on the water. And the other disciples are still sitting in the boat. So let's not give Peter a bad rap, right? They're sitting in the boat. He got out of the boat. And this is one thing, too, oftentimes we focus on, and Peter might have said, why? He could have shot back at Jesus. Why are you saying me of little faith? Come on, I got out of the boat. Look at those guys. Get on their case. Look what I did. But the reality was, Peter showed little faith in that moment when he took his eyes off Jesus. He showed great faith when he stood out and he stepped out of the boat and had his eyes fixed on Jesus. But then when he, in a moment of weakness there, he sees the waves, and in that moment he thinks the waves are greater than my God. He showed little faith there. It wasn't that he showed little faith at the beginning, but in that moment there, that moment of crisis, the waves are greater than my God. And when we panic in life, when we are stressed out, full of anxiety and fear, and I'm not talking about like biochemically we have problems with anxiety disorders and like that, but when we're going through actual circumstances that cause anxiety and fear like this, it is when we're seeing the circumstances as greater than our God. And so it's a great question that Jesus asked of him, why did you doubt? Answer that, Peter. Why did you doubt? Why are you doubting? Why are you of little faith right now? When Jesus is watching over you, when he is still God, why are you doubting? It's an important question for us to ask. Because here's what Jesus said about himself. He says, when he came out there and they looked and they see a ghost, oh no, it's a ghost. Who is this? He said, take courage, it is I. Now, we miss what happened right here in this moment because we're reading this in English, but in the Greek, he says, ego eimi. Get it now? No, I'm just kidding. Ego eimi, which means I am. Ego, where we get our word ego, I, self, ego. The word is ego, it's Greek, so we really should be people that say, let go my ego, right? Let go of my, the Bible calls us to let go of my ego. And so we want to get rid of the me there, right? But he says, I And then Amy is the word to exist. I am. Where have you heard that before? The great I am, right? When Moses is talking to God in the burning bush and God says to him, you go down to Pharaoh and you tell him, set my people free. He says, well, who should I tell them has sent me? He says, tell them, I am that I am has sent you. I am. And in the Greek, that is ego eimi. And here Jesus is making a statement that he is God and that he rules over the sea. He's walking on the waters as Job, in the book of Job, it talks about God in chapter 9, verse 8. It says that who is like God? And it says who tramples on the waves of the sea. God tramples on the waves of the sea. And so here Jesus is probably, he didn't have to walk on the water. He could have walked around. He chose to walk on the water because he's making a claim about himself. I'm the one who tramples on the sea. And the sea, again, remember, is chaos, evil. Jesus overcomes that. He is greater than the sea. He is the great one. So why do we fear? Why do we fear? When Jesus is Lord. So he picks him up and get back in the boat. When they get back in the boat, the wind stopped. Lesson over. Class is dismissed. That's like Jesus says, okay, stop. The storm has served its purpose. The lesson is over. Class is dismissed. They get in the boat. They get to the other side. He showed them what they needed to know. I am Lord. I am. Trust in me. Keep your eyes fixed on me. Peter went home, and I think a lot of times when we struggle and we fall, we focus so much on the falls and our lack of faith. But I'm sure when Peter went back home, talked to his wife, he wasn't like, man, what a day. I sank in the water, No, he went back home. You wouldn't believe what happened. I walked on the water with Jesus. When we go through struggles in life, yes, we are those of little faith. We are. We absolutely are. And we want our faith to grow, but it grows as we keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. When we fall, we say, why did I fall? Why did I doubt that moment there? Oh, remember who Jesus is, and we remember who he is, and we get our eyes fixed back where they belong, and we keep walking with him. And don't get caught up in the falls and the failures. Get caught up in the victories where we do the impossible. We can have that, demonstrate that faith. Look at that. See what, because God's happy. I remember when Todd was here, he shared this summer, he shared an illustration too, which I think is so great. A lot of times we just beat up ourselves for our failures, but God, like a father with his child, like taking their steps, right? Fathers, when you have your child and they're taking their first steps, you're like, come to daddy, right? And then they fall. You're like, you don't like beat the kid and say, why don't you walk? Come on, I've taught you better than this. Get up there and walk. You lame kid, right? No, we scoop that child up. We're like, good job for that step you took. Keep walking, and then we get them back. Come on, come daddy, and then they fall. They might take 2 steps. Good, keep it up. We don't chastise that kid. We get them up. We encourage them for the steps they took. And in our walk with God, like, just step out in faith. Trust God. And for a moment, you might be able to take your eyes off the waves and see Jesus as he truly is. And in that moment, you find peace. And then 10 minutes later, you're like, I looked at the waves again. I got caught up in the waves. Don't beat yourself up. Just refocus your gaze on Jesus. We're going to take some time now for communion and prayer. We're going to do something a little different today, and that is going to be to offer you some time for prayer during this time right now of communion. So if you're going through something right now, you're going through a storm, you're like, I need to get my eyes fixed on Jesus, we want to pray over you. So here's what I'm going to invite you to do is while everyone's coming up and taking communion, you can come and take communion. If you are going through something or through a storm, you're like, I want to go and I need prayer for this. I just want you to come. You can stand or kneel up here along the steps as you're able. Just come on down to the front here and kneel or stand. And someone will come alongside you. We might put a hand on your shoulder. And if you want to share, you can share. If you don't want to share, we're just going to pray over you. We're going to pray over you, whatever you're going through right now. We may not know what that is, but we'll just pray silently or verbally over you. But we'll be praying for you. Just come on down and receive prayer or receive communion. So let's close and let's pray right now, and then you can come and receive. Father, in this time right now, we remember the great I am, who you are. Jesus Christ, your Son, who was tempted in every way that we were tempted in, who experienced all the storms that we could ever experience, even to the point of death and death on a cross. He knows storms. And he followed you perfectly through them. So, Lord, may we keep our eyes on our Rabbi, Jesus. May we walk through the storms, keeping our eyes fixed on the one who knows storms, who's master of them all. And when we come here to the table to remember the death of Jesus Christ, may we remember the lengths that you went through to draw us into fellowship with you. May we remember how good you are to give us life, to conquer death, to conquer sin, so that we will keep our eyes fixed on our Savior. And it's in his name we pray. Amen. Come and receive.